Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Contreras and I'm the director of Inform at the Commonwealth Club. Welcome to today's program with activist and principal of the Black Futures Lab, Alicia Garza, and Congresswoman Barbara Lee. This conversation will be moderated by Fred Blackwell, CEO of the San Francisco Foundation. If you'd like to ask any of our speakers a question during this program, you can do so in the chat section of the live stream that you're currently watching. The Commonwealth Club has suspended in-person events for the time being, but we're dedicated to keeping you informed during this pandemic. We're going full speed ahead with the full slate of live online programming in 2021. We ask that you consider donating to the club to help us continue our work this year and beyond. Visit us at commonwealthclub.org/online to learn more, and you can text the word donate to 415-329-4231 live during this program. You can find this information and more in the description box below. Now, please join me in welcoming Fred Blackwell, Alicia Garza, and Congresswoman Barbara Lee to Inforum.
Hello, and welcome to today's session, the virtual program with Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. As Crystal said, my name is Fred Blackwell, and I'm the CEO of the San Francisco Foundation, which is dedicated to creating a Bay Area where everyone can find a good job, live in a safe and affordable home, and exercise their political voice regardless of their race or their zip code. I am very excited today to be with two fabulous women and leaders to kind of talk about today's events. When I was thinking last night, you two, about what I wanted to say to frame this conversation, it suddenly dawned on me that this moment actually needs no introduction. That we are in a unique moment. We've been in it for a long time in 2020. And I know some of us thought that 2021 would bring a little bit of less craziness to it. But if the first 2 weeks of the year are any sign, it seems like we're still in store for quite a roller coaster. So I really just want to get right to it. And as Crystal said, we are joined today by Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who, among many things, has proposed the establishment of a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Committee. We'll talk a little bit about that. And Alicia Garza, co-creator of Black Lives Matter movement and principal at the Black Futures Lab. And we're going to explore a variety of things that are happening right now, including the things that happened last week and over the last couple of weeks, but also look a little bit into the future. If you would like to ask us a question, please enter that in the chat section of the live stream, and we will get to as many as possible at the end of the program. But as I said, let's really get started. I have so many questions, and I'm sure the audience does as well. But I'd like to start with you, Congresswoman Lee, and really have two questions for you. One is, what was it like on January 6th, being in the building as all of that mischief and mayhem was occurring? And how on earth did we get there?
Well, thank you, Fred. Really happy to be with you today. It feels like I'm home, even though I'm not. I'm on the East Coast, but I'm really pleased to join with you and my sister, Alicia, who continues to speak truth to power in the day right now. It's so important that this discussion take place with Alicia, especially in your moderating, Fred, and with the Commonwealth audience, because so much of what has taken place has historical context. So much is related to what the movement for Black Lives, what Black Futures Lab has been fighting for forever. And so much of what I have been fighting for all of my life and all of our lives as it relates to African Americans, especially, and people of color. And so what was it like January 6th? Well, I was on the floor of Congress in the chamber. There were about 11 Democrats. The speaker asked the leadership team to come to the floor to be there when Vice President Pence went through the certification process of the Electoral College. And let me just say, backing up a little bit, how unprepared the command was of the Capitol Police. And fortunately, Speaker Pelosi made sure that they're no longer there. But I knew something was going to go down. And I share this story because it's important as a Black person for me to say how much we know about white supremacy. I know these groups. I know who they are. They've terrorized the Black community forever. Black people have been living under domestic terrorism for 401 years. Just remind you of the bomb blast that killed 4 little girls in Birmingham, Alabama. So we know this. So I've been, and with Donald Trump for 5 years, I mean, we've known who he was. He campaigned on racist rhetoric, white supremacy agenda. And he came into the White House with Steve Bannon, Gorka, Steve Miller, who developed this white supremacist agenda to be put forth as part of his policy and put forth as to take over the federal government, quite frankly. So we know who he is. So I had been listening to him for 5 years, and especially after the election, more closely. Didn't write anything he has ever said off, but also knowing what the white supremacist groups were saying, reading their words, reading their websites, knowing who they were. So I share that because I put on tennis shoes that day. I knew something was going to go down. I just knew it. Okay. Didn't know what, but I knew it. Now, I've been in harrowing situations before. I almost stepped on a cluster bomb abroad in the Middle East. I've been close to where there were assassination attempts on people I know. I've just barely made it out of that. I was in the Capitol, 9/11, and had to evacuate. I was sitting there when we were told a plane might be coming in, and that was Flight 93. I had on heels that day, and I had to run up Pennsylvania Avenue, and it was really hard with those high heel shoes on. And so on January 6th, I said, I'm wearing tennis shoes today. Now, being there, so I'm ready, thinking something's going to happen, never knowing what. But we were told, and I looked at my phone, and people were texting me saying that the Cannon building had been overtaken, and we heard noise. And so I knew something's about to happen. So finally, we were told we're in lockdown. The security, Capitol Police started taking out, making sure Nancy got out of there, and we couldn't leave. Then we were told, get out your gas mask. That may sound a little unusual, but I live with gas masks every day. I know gas masks. It's okay. Well, I'll take out my gas mask. But I had forgotten how to open it up because we hadn't had any recent training. So Eric Swalwell and I were there sitting there trying to say, okay, will you pull it this way or you pull it that way? So that was, finally got it out. So and security people saying, hurry up. We don't know if you need to put it on, but we know they've got tear gas and all this other stuff. And I looked at my phone and saw they were in Statuary Hall, right in back of us. And so someone told me, I said, no, wait a minute, I can't remember. How do you put this thing on? So someone showed me how to put it on, but they showed me. And when I saw the footage later of the members who actually put it on, who were in the gallery, the instructions I got was to put it on backwards. So, and I had to put it on, I would have had it on backwards. Okay. So then we were told, wait a minute. You might have to hit the ground. You might have to go down on the floor because these people, we could hear them coming. I said, yeah, I know why I wore my tennis shoes. So we could hear them coming. So then after a few minutes, the chaplain went up to the podium and said a prayer. And Eric and I looked at him and said, yeah, okay, we know. If the chaplain's up there saying a prayer, yeah, this is serious. So finally, we got an order to evacuate to an undisclosed location. And I said, oh, God, here we go. Because now we're under attack, under siege, not quite sure what's going on. But we have all of these Republicans, many of whom won't wear masks. They just refuse. And it was like, oh, boy, this is going to be a pandemic upon a super spreader event and the whole 9 yards. So I was trying to, of course, everyone's crowded. And I'm trying to find some space, but we had a narrow staircase is way down. And so finally, we got to the end of where we had to make a turn and just show you how the command forces were, who supervises the police force. One set of a police officer said, go this way. Another said, go that way. I'm saying, okay, now which way do we go? Now, and during that time, I am the type of person who, I'm not like laid back, but I know adrenaline kicks in and you have to be very focused because this is survival. And Black people know when you have to survive, which we have to do each and every day, we draw on something that a lot of people don't know we have. So I'm in survival mode. And he says, this way, okay, think this one through real quick. And so I had my little calculation in survival, but which way to go, which I was right. And the rest of it had to follow. So finally got there. And then we were in this location with no windows or anything. And that's when the super spreader event occurred, where members, of course, contracted the virus. Lisa Blunt Rochester tried to get them, you've seen footage of her trying to get them to wear masks. They wouldn't do that. And we're trying to figure out where's the National Guard, what's going on. And everything was just delayed. And people were getting pretty anxious. And actually, some of our colleagues tweeted out and did a TV interview from our location, from where we were, when we were told not to do that because we couldn't let them know where we were. But some of our Republican colleagues just violated that rule. And finally, let me just say, the Black police officers, because I know the Black police force and have had a lot of stuff to deal with, the Black Capitol Hill, all of the Capitol Hill police officers responded in a way, the ones that weren't part of this conspiracy, in a way that was professional, and they were under such attack, and they are really heroes and sheroes. The Black police officers told me, they said, look, Congresswoman, we had to make sure you all didn't get assassinated. We were defending you. We were defending our democracy. We were defending the Capitol, and we were defending ourselves, because those white supremacists came after the Black police officers with a vengeance. They said, and we were fighting for our lives. They said we were in combat for 2 hours, 3 hours, fighting like we were in a war and being called the N-word over and over and over again. And so many of the Black police officers, and we have a counseling and trauma program going on for anyone, but specifically for a lot of the police officers. And the Black police officers felt like they were in a civil war. And they were protecting everybody and had at the same time having to defend themselves. So I'll stop there and just say it was a terrible moment. And people who don't understand what domestic terrorism is, who don't understand what white supremacy is, who don't understand who that man was in the White House as the leader of this cult now that has developed into an army of armed people, formerly military officers, police officers, and who knows who. If they don't believe us, what Black people have been saying all along, maybe they believe it now, unfortunately. And so we've got to really make sure that we look at white supremacy and systemic racism as one bucket, because white supremacy leads to structural systemic racism, leads to Black and brown people getting killed in the street during peaceful protests, where the rules of the game are totally different.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for sharing that. I know it's probably tough to talk about, and thank you for your ongoing leadership and commitment to justice. Alicia, I want to bring you into this conversation. Good to see you. This summer, after the murder of George Floyd and so many things that we saw, I know for me, one of the things that was gratifying was to see just protest and outrage being displayed at a level of scale and with a level of intensity that I know that I had never seen in my lifetime, and many people said they haven't seen in decades. I think what we were all struck by, though, was not just the hopefulness of seeing people take to the streets, but the other part of the imagery that was frustrating was how at every turn we saw how the folks who were fighting for justice had to face just incredible pushback from law enforcement agencies at every level. And as mad and frustrated as I was to see what was happening inside the Capitol, it was like salt in the wound to see some of the Capitol Police act in the way that they were. and how different the response was on that day than the response in communities around the country during the summer and at the Capitol during the summer. What was going through your mind when you were looking at that, given all the work that you've been doing around police accountability and trying to foster a different kind of relationship with law enforcement and Black people?
Mm. Well, first and foremost, it's so good to be here with you all. Hello to everybody at the Commonwealth Club. Thank you, Fred, for moderating this really important conversation. And of course, Congresswoman Lee, is always an honor to share a stage with you. You know, the first thing I did actually when I saw what was happening at the Capitol building is I texted the Congresswoman and I said, hey, what is going on over there? And are you okay? Because we were ready to turn up too. I will also say, though, that, you know, for me, that day started out like a regular day. We were high, right, off of the results of the Senate race in Georgia. And I think for me, I woke up that day feeling a sense of hope. And then by about 10 o'clock in the morning, that sense was not gone, but it was shaky. And, you know, the thing that struck me in that moment, I saw what was happening on television. I was not there. However, I felt very strongly that this was expected. And it looked to me initially like a temper tantrum, which is actually, I think, some of the character of it. It is a part of the backlash that has resulted from Black communities and communities that have been left out and left behind, really taking the time over this last year, this last 4 years, right, to build the kind of power needed to change the balance of power, to change the direction that this country is headed in. And so it was not a surprise to me to see the storming of the Capitol. And I think what I was waiting for with bated breath was what would be the response. And the thing that was not surprising, but that I felt was important to be on display for the entire world to see, was the disparate response and treatment. You know, I shared a video the other day, you know, of the guy who was wearing the kind of wolf hat, you know, in the chambers. And, you know, there's another man who's on the floor and he's bleeding. And, you know, there's a white Capitol Police officer who walks up to him and literally almost hands the man milk and cookies. He says, hey, you know, are you okay? Do you need medical attention? He says, you know, I'm just hoping that you guys will chill out in here. It's as if he's talking to, you know, a 5-year-old, right? And he's saying, okay, now be good. I'm going to sit you in front of the TV. And I just hope that you're okay. Now, we know that there is disparate treatment in terms of the Black Lives Matter protests, the protests that exploded across this nation. But I also think it's important for people to understand that there is disparate treatment happening in our communities, even when you're not seeing it on television. And I actually like these moments where we have all of this on display because it is undeniable. And we can spin a bunch of stories about, you know, whose fault it is and why it happens and why it's justified. But at the end of the day, you can't deny what you see with your own eyes. And what we've seen with our own eyes for years now has been an attempt to delegitimize and discredit this movement that has really shaken the political landscape in this country in very, very important ways. You know, for me, when I think about what happened at the Capitol, I'm just aware of the fact that it is important for us to zoom out and better understand why this was happening. You know, I've been texting the Congresswoman for the past year, keeping her up to date on the death threats that I'm receiving every single day. You know, I've had the FBI visit my house this year on a duty to warn visit, you know, talking about the fact that my name was found on an envelope in the home of a known white supremacist alongside other elected officials. This problem of white nationalism and racial terror has been going on for a very long time. And it was happening prior to the Capitol, and it will continue to happen unless we take a very sober look at what the intended impacts of this are. You know, Fred, at the end of the day, a lot of people look at what happened at the Capitol and they say, oh, that was the extreme, right? That is an isolated incident. These are the craziest of the crazies. And I think it's important for people to understand that that's actually not it at all. These were people who run businesses. These were people who traveled to the Capitol specifically for this purpose. They are your neighbors. They are your bosses. They are your coworkers. Maybe they are your family members. And it's important for people to understand that, because I think that too many of us look at racism and we say, oh, it's just a bunch of bad apples. It's a bunch of crazy people. But in fact, right, racism is about rigged rules. It has nothing to do with people's personalities. And so at the end of the day, we have had an administration that has been coddling this movement. In fact, they have moved this movement into the government. We now have QAnon supporters in Congress. We have people who give open threats to Black Lives Matter, governing our cities and our states and our nation. And at the end of the day, when they say they want to invalidate the results of the election, what they are saying is that they do not want Black people to have our votes counted, that actually the impact that Black communities had should be seen as invalid in terms of determining the direction of this country. That is an example of rigged rules. It's an example of the ways in which our communities are left out and left behind. And lastly, I'll just say that, you know, there were some very heroic people in the Capitol that day who tried very, very hard to stop what was happening. But there's a bigger story here, which is that so many of these people that stormed that Capitol building, they weren't just business owners. They weren't just your neighbors or your friends or your family. They were either current or former members of law enforcement. And for a very long time, this movement has been talking about the ways in which there has been an infiltration of law enforcement by white supremacist forces. The FBI has talked about this. The FBI designated last year and said that white nationalists are the greatest threat to American democracy in a decade. And they warned us that this movement was growing. So it's important for us not to look at this as the exception to the rule, and really to approach it as the rule itself. Only then can we figure out what the most appropriate solutions are to it.
Thank you. And if I could just stick with you for a second, you talked about the differential treatment, the fact that many of our law enforcement agencies have been infiltrated by these extremists and these white supremacists. For you, what are the implications of what we saw and how law enforcement did and did not respond on that day for the broader efforts of police transformation?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, for the last decade almost, we've heard Blue Lives Matter as a response to the cry for Black Lives to Matter. We have heard from law enforcement across the country that there is now a culture where law enforcement is disrespected and distrusted. And they put that at the feet of this movement. But I think what's important for us to just highlight is that, in fact, it is at their own feet. You know, there is an eroded trust in law enforcement, and that does not have anything to do with a demonization campaign. It has everything to do with the fact that law enforcement enjoys special privileges in this country that civilians do not. And that is a huge problem as it relates to laws. When police commit crimes in our community, whether it be the murder of Oscar Grant just a few blocks from my home, or whether it be the murder of George Floyd, which was captured on television. We saw Officer Chauvin with his knee in the neck of a man who died in front of us, and he had his hand in his pocket while he was doing it. That is at the feet of law enforcement. That is not at the feet of this movement. We have to start to unrig the rules and the stories that help support the rules. You know, in this country, police officers are untouchable, and that has to change in order for trust to be rebuilt, if that is even possible. We cannot continue to allow a small group of people to be able to skirt the laws that they are supposed to enforce. That is the same problem that we dealt with Donald Trump, and we have to be able to address that in a real way. You know, the other piece I think that is really clear is that from all of the things that we saw this summer, from Ahmaud Arbery, which was a vigilante murder, to Breonna Taylor, right, which was a police murder, what we have to start to grapple with is, what is the role of police in our society? What are we asking police to do? And are they doing that? Are they equipped to do it? Are they being trained to do it? And are they doing it well? Where does public safety come from? Does it come from people patrolling our communities with guns and military grade weapons? Or does it come from communities having the things that they need to live well and to thrive? There are certain communities in our nation that look like war zones all the time. And that is because of a deep devastation in community infrastructure, with the lack of affordable and accessible housing, the lack of affordable and accessible healthcare, wages that are too low to support a family. And it is bolstered by the presence of unaccountable law enforcement in our communities. All of these things can be changed, but it takes political will, and it takes political courage, and it takes movements in order to help forward that change.
Brett, let me just respond real quickly to something Alicia said so eloquently as she laid out the whole history of white supremacy within the last few years. She said they warned us that they were the biggest threat, right? With the white supremacists. Okay, but you know what they did? You know what the Justice Department did after that? They set up a unit targeting, they called it Black identity extremists, okay, to harass, as Alicia said, and to really try to pull off another COINTELPRO. So out of the identifying the Black identity extremists, and I know this because Black Caucus has been dealing with this for the last 4 years, they set up a unit in the FBI to vamp on and target Black identity, quote, extremists, which means peaceful protesters. That's their response.
That's right. And let me stick with you for a minute, Congresswoman. Both you and Alicia referred to the fact, actually, that while Wednesday was a low point, it is actually bookended by the hopefulness that was associated with the outcome Tuesday, and also the hopefulness that was associated with the inauguration. And so let me just, one of the things about the inauguration that was, remarkable, and you mentioned it, I would talk about, is the fact that Kamala Harris is now our vice president, first woman, first Black woman, first Asian woman, first woman to rock chucks on the campaign trail, all of that. And, I just want to read a tweet that you put out that said, "On this historic day, I'm wearing Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm's pearls, given to me by her goddaughter, who said that her godmother would not want it any other way, because I am Shirley Chisholm, and because of Shirley Chisholm, Vice President Harris is." Can you talk about that move and what all this means?
Gosh, first of all, as a woman of faith, I just have to say the light always outshines the darkness. Okay, so we've had some really dark moments, and here we had, like Alicia said, the elections in Georgia, then January 6th. Okay, but we made it through that. Then we get to the threats around the inauguration, and they're real. They were real. They're still real. We made it through that. And so the light is still shining, okay? And Kamala is such a reflection of that. Here, born in Oakland, raised in Berkeley, a daughter of the East Bay. So I always say, we're in the house now. We're in the White House. The East Bay is in the White House. And that is just so remarkable, because I know, it's almost said Senator Harris, Vice President Harris, and I've known her a long years and supported her through a lot, and we're friends. And she recognizes the importance of women, and Black women especially, who came before her, who had to fight like you would not believe. I mean, going back 401 years ago when they brought us here as enslaved Africans, and recognize it took all this time for a Black woman, a South Asian woman, a woman of color, to get to the White House. Shirley Chisholm ran for president. That's how I got involved in politics. I was a student at Mills College, head of the Black Student Union, And she took me to task because I wasn't registered to vote. And from that day forward, I worked in her presidential campaign. We organized Alameda County, went on to Miami. I was a Shirley Chisholm delegate, and she mentored me and helped me throughout my life. And I saw her. I was working for our great beloved Ron Dellums. And so Shirley, I saw how she had to deal with misogyny and with racism and with sexism and people calling her crazy. She was the first Black woman elected to Congress. She had to deal with all that stuff here on Capitol Hill by herself. And she stood strong, and she kept telling me, don't back down. You keep going. These rules weren't made for us. They were, like Alicia said, rigged. They're made not for us. So we've got to get in there and shake things up and change the rules of the game. So she really influenced me a lot. And I know if it hadn't been for Shirley Chisholm, I would not be where I am today. And Kamala knows that also. And so those pearls that I wore were so, for me, so important because I felt her spirit, because I know she was saying, job well done, but it took us too long, and you better not back down. You better keep fighting so that we could not only get on the inside, women and Black women, women of color, but you got to get in there and make some noise and transform this country. Shirley wasn't a person who said tinker around the edges. She said, you go in there and change the system, change those rigged rules. And so that day was so, for me personally, because I supported Kamala when she ran for president. And I was the first member of Congress to do that. I went all over the country fighting and with people about why she should run. And I saw, though, women of color, and in the South, I saw a lot of white people, white Southerners, talk about Kamala and come to her campaign and support her. So I knew then that she had a bright future, and that this is her trajectory. So Shirley Chisholm was smiling. She was with us that day. And she was happy, but she said, look, we've come so far, but it took 50 years. Now let's keep going.
Thank you. Yeah, Alicia, you referred to Tuesday and your hopefulness associated with Wednesday morning. And, that was hopefulness and celebration, not just about the outcome, but about the process. And we know that it was the product of years, if not decades, of hard work from organizers on the ground, engaging in advocacy and leadership development and all that kind of stuff, and the hard work that went into that. And we know that you have been involved in that kind of shoulder to the wheel work for decades now. And you referred to the fact that the FBI had to come to your home and you've gotten death threats. How do you kind of maintain your hopefulness and your fortitude? And what do you draw on to keep your strength during all this work?
Well, I too am a woman of faith. And so for me, it's my spiritual convictions that help me keep going. But also what I know for a fact is that if we weren't doing something of consequence, I would be being left alone. Nobody is sending death threats to people who are not interrupting, right, the status quo. And so I try to remind myself of that. And I appreciate the Congresswoman for continuing to remind me of that. When I will say, these people are nuts, she say, well, they wouldn't be crazy if you weren't shaking things up. And so I really do appreciate that. But I will also say this, one of the things that keeps me going is learning how to identify when it is that we're winning. And this last 4 years has been really, really hard. It's the hardest on record, at least in my lifetime. And there were several points where it just felt painful to try to put one foot in front of the other. And what I have learned is that, it's not just about faith in the things that you can't see. It's about acknowledging, right, when we have moved the needle. And I hear a lot of people saying things like, well, it's not everything that we wanted, and it's not quite as much enough as the things that we wanted. But here's the thing. We did some amazing work, and we're just getting started. We changed the balance of power in the United States Senate. That is huge. We won an incredible victory in Georgia, several of them, frankly, where we literally expanded the electorate in a state that has been hamstrung, right, by people who do not want to see progress. And in the face of that, right, we prevailed. We turned out more people than almost any other time in history, not just to vote, but to say this democracy belongs to you and it only works if you take responsibility for it too. And on top of that, right, we are continuing to change the narrative around who belongs, who deserves to have dignity. And we are steadfast in that, and we are relentless in that. And so for me, part of the way I'm able to keep going, part of the way I'm able to remain hopeful is to be able to zoom out and say, what has all of this hard work and all of these hard days amounted to? Mm-hmm. And I will say to you 100%, I cried during the inauguration. I cried knowing that there's a ton more work to do. I cried knowing that they are going to disappoint us, and that is a fact. But I also cried knowing that we are building the kind of infrastructure that is strong enough to withstand all of that and still be victorious. So for me, it is about being able to identify when it is that we are winning. And as a mentor of mine used to say, you have to understand if you are having problems of growth or problems of decay. And I really believe that our movement right now is having problems of growth and certainly not problems of decay.
Oh, wow. That is so inspirational to hear you speak with that level of hopefulness. But for both of you all, I mean, there obviously is a sense of relief that we have a responsible adult in the White House now. And I think you guys would both agree that doesn't mean the work is done. So for both of you, if you could talk a little bit about, like, for those of us who are like fighting for justice, what is needed now? And what do you project in terms of, like, for movement organizers and movement builders? What's in store for us in the next 4 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think accountability, first of all. And I think Alicia laid out the fact very modestly, but I say it was the movement for Black lives. It was young people who won these elections, and they changed the course and the trajectory of this country. And so we have to make sure that we hold the administration accountable, because I think they're doing they started out doing a very good job in laying out their agenda, but we've got to keep pushing hard. And only that will happen if our democratic process of petitioning our government and of our First Amendment rights of protesting, of holding congressional members, all elected officials, the president and the vice president accountable, because they won on an agenda that was an agenda for truth and justice. And they can't turn around now, but we know how politics is. And so we have to just make sure that we keep going, we keep fighting, we keep pushing, don't let up. Now's the time to really be very assertive, be very focused, and be very clear on our work for the people, because that's what they have to do, is be accountable to the people. Yes.
I agree with that 100%. And, this last year, we designed at the Black Futures Lab, we've talked about this tons on this stage, a document called the Black Agenda 2020. It is a roadmap, a legislative roadmap for how it is that we make Black Lives Matter from City Hall to Congress. We want to make sure that that agenda is implemented, and we will continue to be relentless in making sure that we are setting the floor for what racial justice looks like in this country. We also want to make sure that we are not abandoning and forgetting about the fights that are ongoing that we still have not won. I'm aware, right, that in my city, that there is a renewed push to ensure that there is justice for Oscar Grant and for his family. And there is a push to try and encourage and strengthen District Attorney Nancy O'Malley to reopen that case so that the officers who were involved in Oscar's death can be held accountable, and so that we can actually turn the page. Wanda and Uncle Bobby have not been able to turn the page because the accountability has not been there in that case. And so I want us to keep looking forward, but I also want us to remember that there are still things that are undone, and they are undone right in the cities that we live in. You don't have to look to Minneapolis or Louisville, Kentucky to figure out where justice needs to occur. Justice needs to occur right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that's not just related to Oscar Grant, that's certainly related to the family of Mario Woods, the family of Kenneth Harding, and so many more who never make national news, right? But certainly are a product of these kinds of rigged rules that need to be undone, and this kind of power, right, that needs to be transformed. So that is something that I think we need to continue to focus on when we talk about police accountability, when we talk about criminal system reform. There are so many laws and policies, not just in the nation, but in our states, that really prevent that kind of accountability from happening. And so it is important to kind of dig into our own backyards and change what's happening here so that we can be a light and a beacon for the rest of the country in terms of how to really bring justice forward.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned our backyard. Congresswoman, you mentioned that we got the East Bay and the White House. We got the two of you with Bay Area roots that are strong. We have so many Black women who are providing leadership who are from the Bay. You know, I could just go, our friend Latifah Simon, my mother, Angela Glover Blackwell, London Breed from the Bay Area. So, I have to use a little bit of facilitator's license here as a son of Oakland myself, and just ask y'all the question, like, what's in the soil in the Bay Area and in Oakland in the East Bay that is producing these Black women leaders that are just changing the world?
Lisa, you want to go first?
Well, we certainly are blessed to have a long legacy of freedom fighters who we don't just read about in books, right? These are our neighbors. These are our friends. These are our family members. It's really beautiful in the Bay Area to be able to run into Angela Davis at the grocery store, or run into my sister, Erica Huggins, at the doctor's office, right? I mean, these folk who have put so much on the line are still around, and they're around to let us know when we're not doing the right thing, and they are around to let us know when we are doing the right thing. So I'm not sure if it's in the soil or in the water or in the air or in the music, because there is just something about the Bay that is very, very unique. And I can tell you that from having traveled all over the world. But I also think that it is the intentionally built infrastructure that still lives on. We don't look at the Black Panthers as something that happened long ago, right? We don't look at the Black freedom struggle as something that happened long ago. It is still very much alive and well, and it is defended here in this community. That's what I think. Congresswoman, how about you?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think this is the historical context is so important, because the Bay Area, I mean, you think back and look back at our history. Black people came out here to work, in the shipyards. I mean, there's a history. C.L. Dellums, leader of the Brotherhood of train, the train car porters, Brotherhood. You have freedom fighters who fought in the civil rights movement. We had our own progressive civil rights movement. You look at Ron Dellums. Ron was the father of coalition politics. You look at the fact that for instance, my congressional district, I've never had a majority Black district, but we have had to work with our allies and form coalitions. And we've never lost sight of the fact that it's out of the struggle of African Americans that Black women and men in the Bay Area have kept that struggle going, and i.e. the Black Panther Party, like Alicia said. I was a community worker with the Black Panther Party. I mean, and I've been like dogged when I was in the legislature for being, a quote communist. They relate that to the Black Panther Party, but I wouldn't let them do that. here in Congress, first it's like, communist sympathizer, coming from the Bay Area, you're a socialist. I mean, I've been on every list, you had every kind of court case you would not believe, but we stand firm because we know we're on the right side of history. But now I have to tell you, everyone's looking at us like, how are y'all doing it? How are you dealing with immigration issues? How have you been able to be in coalition with others, even though it's a struggle because our population and Black community is not that great, but we still lead on progressive issues. And I think with Alicia and with our younger women, Black women who are coming along, and Black men also, and the justice spirit, it's a continuum. And I don't think any of us who've been around a while worry about anybody taking over, because I feel really good that we have a heck of a lot of Black folks in the Bay Area whose consciousness is such. It's a justice, it's a freedom, it's an equality consciousness that permeates everything that we do. And so now, again, the rest of the world looks at us and says, we want to look like you. We want to do what you've done, because you all, even though you're in the midst of your own struggles, you seem to somehow keep moving forward. And communities all over the country now are checking us out.
Thanks, y'all, for indulging me on that question. Alicia, we're about to transition soon into Q&A, but I want to give you the opportunity to tell us, what is the Black Futures Lab? What are you guys cooking up in there? What are you doing?
Right.
Oh, well, the Black Futures Lab is an innovation and experimentation lab that really looks at creative ways to engage Black people in the civic process and to make Black communities powerful in politics so that we can be powerful in the rest of our lives. We've done a number of projects leading up to today, including the largest survey of Black people in America in 156 years, the Black Agenda 2020, which more than 100,000 Black voters in 9 states used to make their decisions about who should represent them up and down the ballot. We also launched a Black to the Future Public Policy Institute last year, where we trained 41 Black leaders in 9 states how to write, win, and implement new rules in cities and states across the country. And moving forward into this year, we are taking some of the policy campaigns that were designed in that institute, and we're investing in those campaigns to push them over the finish line. So, Congresswoman, you may be hearing from me shortly.
Well, that. Yeah. Alicia, but I just have to just say, Alicia has brought the Black Futures Lab agenda to the Congressional Black Caucus, okay? So that, I mean, yeah, she's penetrated the halls of Congress with a policy agenda that we are definitely embracing. So thank you.
And speaking of policy agendas, that's one of the first questions that has come up here. It's for Representative Lee. What do you feel are the biggest legislative priorities for this new administration? And how does the siege and impeachment impact or affect those priorities?
Well, the siege and the impeachment, we have a job to do in the House and the Senate and the White House. So this division of labor has got to be made clear. We can't say we give this man Trump a slap on the hand and he can go free. He has to be held accountable. The Senate has got to do its job, and hopefully they will convict him. That's their job. That's not the president's job. That's the Senate's job. The president, and I think they've shown us what their first 100 days will look like, and it's got to be crushing this virus. People are dying each and every day, or just hanging on by a thread because of their livelihood. Their lives and their livelihoods are at stake. And so coming up with the plan to crush the virus, and I'm working with them on that because, we have disproportionate numbers of Black and brown people dying and getting sick from the virus. And the economic impacts are more severe. So they've got a $1.9 trillion package that we're working on together to try to make sure that happens. And so that's the first 100 days. That's got to happen. But in the meantime, their variety of buckets that they have that they're working on. I'll just cite the racial equity and justice when Susan Rice is heading up. We met with her earlier, the Domestic Council, which is a council that is interagency. It deals with all the federal agencies and their priorities in terms of legislation and funding priorities. racial equity is one of the biggest issue. And they're looking at racial equity and justice in every single federal policy and program as we speak. And so for us, working with them with legislation on racial justice and equity, on climate, on economic recovery, we have legislation to work with them on. So it's a big job that the Biden-Harris White House has, but members of Congress, especially members of the Tri-Caucus, the Black, Hispanic, Asian Pacific American, and our 2 Native American, soon to be 1 Native American woman, because Deb's going to be Secretary of Interior. Yes, we're working with the Biden administration to be sure that our voices, the voices of Black Futures Lab and the policies and I can tell you, Alicia, much of what you have here, we're looking at. I'm co-chairing with Cory Booker, the Domestic Policy Council team for the Black Caucus. So we're looking at that to get to the agencies. And so just know our work is just beginning on that front. So the Biden-Harris team, they've got a lot on their plate, but we're putting a lot on their plate also to make sure that they move forward in a way that really closes a loop on our agenda.
Nice. The second question is about voter suppression, and I think it's for both of you all. And it says, how does voter suppression engender white supremacy? And can we draw a connection between the disenfranchisement of Black voters and the persistence of violence against Black lives?
Absolutely. I mean, you just did it right there, whoever asked the question. So thank you for doing that. There's a long history of trying to prevent Black communities from weighing in on the decisions that impact our lives. And the whole rationale and reason for that, right, is the fear that if Black people were to weigh in on the decisions that are being made about us, without us, that we would fundamentally transform the way that power operates in this country because we've been left out, because we have been kept out. And certainly this issue of racial terror, especially as it relates to voter suppression, it really goes hand in hand, and it has a long history in this nation. I think it is important for us to understand as well that we need to undo, right, all of these rules that are preventing our communities from being as powerful as we should be. You know, this government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people, not of some people, not by some of us, and not for some of us. That is the whole point of democracy. And so I think as we continue to push for more participation, we also have to pay a lot of attention to laws and policies that suppress votes, not just of Black people, but Indigenous people, poor people, Latinx people, right? Women. There's a whole bunch of ways in which the preventing of people from being able to weigh in on the decisions that impact their lives keep the rules rigged in favor of people who have already consolidated power into the hands of a few. Our role is to bust that up so that more people have more power. That's really what it is that we're fighting for. And certainly voting and the issue of elections and electoral power is one of those places in which we need to weigh in pretty deeply.
January 6th manifested voter suppression in a big way, in a dangerous way. The denial of the fact that Biden and Harris won this election, the fact that they did not want to count or value or recognize that these were Black and brown votes for the most part in these states that they were trying to take away, the lies they told about this election. 5 people died as a result of this attempted coup. All of this relates to voter suppression and the fact that it continues, and it continues in a very violent way now. And it's the embodiment it's the manifestation of white supremacy.
This one is for Alicia. When you and your sister started the Black Lives Matter movement back in 2013, did you imagine how much the movement would grow and become so synonymous with the fight for justice?
No, but I'm so glad it did. I'm so glad it did. And, you know, I've said many times that growing up, I always felt like I was born in the wrong era. I had read all of these books about all of this movement that had happened before I was alive that actually brought me to this very place. And I always felt like, man, I will never see something like that in my lifetime. So I'm so grateful to be like the smallest piece of something that is so incredible and transforming the lives of millions.
Yeah. Representative Lee, but I think both of you all could talk to this one. In Alameda last week, a white gunman threatened mostly Black protesters with officers supposedly at the scene, and he still got away. How do we combat this racist double standard locally?
Alicia, you want to start?
Again, there are several people that we elect, right, to help ensure this level of accountability. And it's important for us to know when we vote, right, what the responsibilities of these folks are. I heard about this incident. I believe it was a protest at DA O'Malley's house, and there was a white man who came out in a mask with a rifle and threatened people. And this is literally the height of white supremacy. I can't walk out my front door with anything that looks like a rifle without not only having the police called on me, but possibly, right, losing my life. And so it is important. It's important to hear from our elected officials, like DA O'Malley, whose neighbor this was, that was not acceptable. It's important for her to actually take a leadership role here in making sure that does not happen again and that there is justice and accountability. And then, of course, this also kind of leads into the conversation that we were having earlier about not just disparate treatment, but about the lack of rules, right, that are enforced equitably. And it is important. I don't think we can use jail for everything, right? We can't just jail everybody that acts wrong. But I do think that we need to set the tone. And that is really up to not just our elected officials, right? But it's certainly also up to each of us to ensure, right, that we don't continue to be quiet about these types of issues. So that would be my weigh in on this. Congresswoman, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say the person who can, I heard about this. I thought, what if this were an African American? What would have happened? I know what would have happened. And so I think we have to, again, the racism that's embedded in every system in this country and every policy and that allows something like this to happen has to be not only examined, but reimagined and crushed and dismantled and build a new world, a new order, new world in my congressional district also. We're not exempt from the bad stuff that happens as a result of systemic racism.
Thank you both. I'm told I have time to ask one more question, so I think I'll go with this one for you, Congresswoman Lee. What do you anticipate the outcome of the Senate impeachment trial will be?
Well, look, if they want to uphold the Constitution, and if they do not believe that no one is above the law, if they don't believe that no one is above the law, or if they do believe that no one is above the law, then they should convict. They should hold this trial and convict, because this man, and the second thing is the evidence is there. We know what he did to incite violence, to be an accessory to the 5 people who died. We know that that over the last 5 years, he has set this up, and that he, in many ways, prompted them and encouraged them to do what they did. And you're going to tell me that he's not going to be convicted when you convict Black and brown young people for marijuana charges? No. So I'm, hopeful that all of the senators will uphold their constitutional responsibility and convict this man, because he committed acts against the 14th Amendment and he committed acts that warrant him to be convicted. And then I hope the criminal courts take over.
So I'm told that it's tradition to close out these inforums with the same question. And the question is, what is your 60-second idea to change the world? And I've been told that Alicia has answered that question maybe 43 times over the course of the last year.
And I want to hear her answer it first.
All right. We will ask her first. Alicia.
So I'm going to do a new one, a new 60-second idea. And I've been thinking a lot about how it is that we address some of the biggest challenges facing our country right now. And I really do believe that some of this is going to have to require big, bold, innovative legislation. So I know we have packages out there like Justice and Policing, which I think is an important start. But I'm going to say my 60-second idea to change the world is to pass the Breathe Act, which I think is a comprehensive look at how it is that we invest in communities and divest from punishment, both as an economy and as a practice.
All right. Congresswoman Lee.
Okay, you got to tell me when 60 seconds is up. My idea, what I want to see is two things. One is I want to see, like 40 some countries have established after genocides, crimes against humanity, slavery, my commission on truth, racial healing, and transformation. I want to see this because it's time that the descendants of enslaved Africans and other people who have been dealt the deal that they have had to live with in America be able to come forth and bring this day of reckoning, truth-telling moment to America so we can move forward. Secondly, I want to see us repair the damage by supporting reparations, HR 40. It's time this country come to grips with the fact that generations of African Americans have been denied equal opportunity and parity and justice because of the Black codes, lynching, mass incarceration, because of segregation, Jim Crow, you name it. It's time to repair the damage, get rid of systemic racism, pass reparations, and the Truth Commission.
All right, that was within the 60 seconds too. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Alicia Garza, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining us today at Inform at the Commonwealth Club. For viewers, if you would like to watch more virtual programs and support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. Again, I'm Fred Blacklow, the San Francisco Foundation. Pleasure to be with you all both. And that ends our program. Everybody stay safe.
Nice seeing you.